All right, so I wanted to take advantage of what I think is a good opportunity to show exactly why many people don't know how to do research and how many people sabotage their research. Okay, so I was watching a YouTube video earlier, and it's about a common thing that comes up in the conscious community, and it's something I ran about all the time on Facebook, which is the story of Horus, the story of Jesus. People say that Jesus is a copy of the story of Horus. So that's what the guy was dealing with in the video from a Christian perspective, giving an explanation of why they're not true. He talked about the Council of Nicaea, the same stuff that everyone in the conscious community tends to bring up. So a guy in the comments, he asked, he said, "Where's your sources?" So he was talking to the person who made the video. Since I was right there in the comments, I actually started to interact with the young man and talk to him. And I want to show y'all the line of reasoning that he used to approach the researching the truth, right? And I want to show you the mistakes that he makes, because most people, I suspect that most people do exactly what he did. And I'm going to show you why it's wrong. Okay, so the Christian guy makes his video. He says, look, what you're saying about Horus and Jesus being the same is not true. What you're saying about the Council of Nicaea is not true. All the stuff that the conscious community says. And the video is actually not relevant to what I want to show here, because what I want to show here is basically, it's all it's all based on the conversation I have with this young man. So his reply to the video, one of his replies, we went back and forth a little bit, but we weren't really saying much. So he says here, he says, okay, some of the things he stated I knew about, like the Kemet, Cush, etc., is elementary knowledge. But I would like to see facts by people who lived in those times to back up the biblical prophets, and not info from the Catholic government. So he believes the Catholic government is liars. He don't want to hear people arguing. He don't want to hear Catholics arguing, proving the case. He want to hear from people that lived around those times. Now, I don't know I don't really know much about the people that lived around before the New Testament, like from other civilizations. But I do know about people that wrote around the time of Jesus. So I said Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, Suetonius, and Josephus are all non-Christians who wrote about Jesus. The only religious one is Josephus, who is not a Jew. So I gave him 4 people who were not Christians who wrote about Jesus. And if you research them, you'll see that they all kind of say the same thing. So he replies, Roman government lies, not credible. So he doesn't, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, and Suetonius, they're all Roman government officials. Josephus is not. So he's rejecting the evidence. First, he says he wants someone who's not Catholic. I give him 4 non-Catholics. He dismisses 3 of them because they're Romans. He didn't say anything about Josephus the rest of the conversation. So anyway, here's my reply. Spencer, that's a genetic fallacy. The Roman government didn't even accept Christianity until hundreds of years later. When you read the writings of those whom I listed, they're not even pro-Christian. In fact, Pliny wrote because he wasn't sure how to prosecute Christians for not honoring Caesar. Plus, Josephus was not a Roman. So, Pliny Suetonius, Tacitus, and Pliny the Younger, they are Roman government officials, but during the time that they wrote, Christianity was not accepted by the Roman government. In fact, when Pliny wrote, Pliny was writing saying, hey, you sent me here to prosecute these Christians. I never dealt with them before. Some of them are old. Do we treat them all the same? You get the death penalty for not honoring Caesar. So he was asking, should we treat them all the same? What about the ones that say they were Christians, but that was before? What if they repent, or not repent? What if they stop being a Christian and they say that they'll honor Caesar? Do we let them live? That's what he was writing about. So he wasn't even a Christian, but he writes about Jesus and Christians. And I say, plus Josephus wasn't a Roman. So you dismissed 3 of them. Josephus wasn't a Roman. What about him? Spencer says, you're right. I'm not going to accept any sources from Christians because they operate from a Catholic base, and that's BS. Oh, I didn't say. Also, I wanted to mention that a genetic fallacy is when someone gives an argument for or evidence for something, and you dismiss the evidence or the argument because of who they are, not because what they said is right or wrong, but simply because who they are. Right? So that is what a genetic fallacy is. So he says he's not going to accept anything from Christians because they operate from a Catholic base. I said, Spencer, Christians existed before Catholicism. You're also setting yourself up for some very biased research. Now, he uses circular reasoning, and I'm going to try to explain it to him here. You won't accept testimony from Christians, but it logically follows that if they could prove that the Bible was true, if they could prove the Bible to be true, then they would be Christians. So those who have proof that the Bible is true, you won't accept them because they believe the Bible is true. And that circular reasoning, basically, he says, I want a non-Christian to prove that this stuff is historically true, right? The stuff in the Bible. Well, if they believed that the stuff in the Bible were true, they wouldn't be non-Christians. They would be Christians. So if they prove the Bible is true, you'll reject what they say because they believe the Bible is true. Now, I hope that makes sense, because it really doesn't make sense in real life, but I hope what my explaining of it makes sense. So he's looking for a person who don't believe the Bible is true to prove that the Bible is true. Because if the person does believe the Bible is true, they're going to be, hey, this is true. I'm going to become a Christian because it's true. All right. I hope that makes sense. Now, second paragraph. None of the people I mentioned were Christians, but you reject the Romans because they're Romans, even though they were not religious. And the Catholic Church didn't even exist when those people wrote. So he don't want to listen to Christians. He don't want to listen to Romans. He don't want to listen to Christians because they're Christians. He don't want to listen to Romans because they're Romans. And he don't want to listen to Catholics because they're Catholics. So even though the Romans that I listed were not religious men. So I try to explain it to him some more. So you want evidence for the Bible, but not from a Christian and not from Rome. Now, just about every single serious scholar will tell you that Jesus was real and that we have more evidence for Jesus historically than any other person in ancient times. But I'm sure you'll find a reason why they are not trustworthy. And I say that because he's dismissed the Christians, he's dismissed the Romans, and he's dismissed the Catholics. Keep that in mind, because you're going to see something interesting at the bottom of the page there. Now, I said what you're really looking for is a black non-Christian to tell you that the Bible is true. But think about how silly that is. Now, the reason why I said that is I already know where he's going with that. This whole concept, the whole reason why, the whole thing that this conversation even comes up all the time is because of race. It's because of race. So if I give him someone who's not a Christian, who's not a Roman, who's not a Catholic, who can give evidence that this stuff is real and they're a white person, he's going to say, well, I'm not going to listen to them. They lie about our history. So I'm challenging him because I'm trying to point out this is the way you're thinking. You're dismissing people based on who they are. So it doesn't really matter who I give you. Unless they're a black person who's not a Christian, you're not going to listen to them. So now he says, look up Serapis. They changed his name to Jesus. As for the other characters, Catholic lies, and the Bible is, well, fairy tales, and I'm not looking for black. That's obvious in the book and real history. So he said he's not looking for black. He's saying, well, basically, I believe all those people were black. Jesus, all of them were black. So this is the kicker here. This last comment he made is the kicker. He says, look up Serapis. Now, Serapis is some god that the Romans or the Greeks made up this god, and to try to appease the other, they like mixed two gods together and made up a god. So that's what Serapis is. Now, There is a document. There is a document that claims that Christians worship Serapis, right? Now, this is why he says look up Serapis, because there's a document that says that Christians worship Serapis. But here's the thing. That document that says that is a Roman document that was written when the Catholics had control of the church. Now, the Catholics didn't write the document. It's some kind of it's supposed to be like some kind of historical record that was written around the year 400, and it mentions a letter. It says that this letter was written in the year 100 something, and it mentions Serapis and Christians. So now that he found something that fits with his belief, now he's going to accept testimony from the Roman government when before he said he don't trust them. Now he's going to accept stuff from the Catholics, like when the Catholic was in charge of the church. He's going to accept, now he's accepting all the stuff that he told me was inappropriate for proof because it fits with what he already believes. So now it's okay to accept it. Now here's the thing. There is one document there's that one document that mentions Serapis, right? There's nowhere else that document is mentioned. There's that one writer in that one, book or whatever mentions that. I gave him 4 people from earlier. This document that I can't remember the name of it. It's like, I'm not even going to try to remember. Antiquity. It's like something about Roman history. So if you want to look for it, just put in Serapis Roman history. You'll find it. So this document was dated to the year 400. The 4 people that I gave him, they all wrote before the year 200. They all wrote from like the year 50 to the year 150 or something like that. So I gave him 4 people who wrote earlier, who they're all separate people, and they all say the same thing. He rejects them because they're Romans and all of that. And he accepts a document that was written in the year 400, 250 years later, by the same government that it's considered to be a forgery, but you look it up and you decide for yourself. He's going to accept this document from 250 years later, where it's the only thing in history that's been found from that time period that says this. And he's going to run with that over the overwhelming evidence that says otherwise. So this is what people do. A person with common sense, a person who's thinking logically, I should say, would realize what they're doing. But I think most people do research like this. You believe something, so you look for evidence that supports what you believe. You don't look at this person says this side says this, and they argue or they interact with each other. And listening to both arguments, I think I'm going to make my opinion that this guy is true and that guy's false. That's not what people do. What people do is like, if Jesus ain't real, I'm going to prove it. I'm going to research and prove it. What they do is they'll look for websites that say that Jesus isn't real, and they'll read what they say. And then it's like, yep, I knew it. Never mind. They don't. And then there's a website that may say Jesus is real. Here's the proof. And they'll say, no, man, you're biased because you believe he's real. So you're biased. I'm not going to listen to you. Not realizing that the people that say that he isn't real, they're also biased. All right. So that is how people research. And eventually I asked him a question. I said, well, what is this? I said, what makes the story of Serapis true? Because I knew where it came from. I said, what's your source? Because in the beginning of this dialogue, he was asking the guy in the video, where is your source? What are your sources for what you're saying? So I said also, what is your method of determining whether a source is trustworthy or not? Most people, they don't have a standard for determining whether a document is or whether a person is historically trustworthy or not. People don't have a standard. They just go by how they feel. Right. And when you do that, you'll just accept things that fit your belief and things that don't. Let me give you an example. How many times have you heard people say, I said, how many times have you heard people say that Jesus is fake because the letter J didn't exist when he lived? The letter J didn't exist until the 1600s or whatever. People will say that, but yet they'll talk about Egypt. They'll talk about King Tut, Akhenaten, Amun-Ra. Like they'll talk about all of these Egyptians who have names that didn't exist because the letter E, the letter T, the letter R, those letters didn't exist when ancient Egyptians lived. But you will never hear someone say, hey, if Jesus isn't true because if Jesus is fake because the letter J didn't exist, then these other people are fake because the letter T didn't exist either. They won't do that. They use a sliding scale. They use inconsistent methods. They use a higher standard for other people than they do for themselves. So that's what I'm saying. People they'll accept things, or they'll demand things for other people's beliefs that they won't submit themselves to. So they don't have a reliable method. That's why when people ask me for proof, now I ask them, what kind of proof do you want? Because that way, when they say, I want this or this or this, and you give it to them, they can't backtrack. They can't make excuses or try to dismiss it, because they're the ones that gave the standard. All right. So this is how you don't do research. You have to have an open mind. If you're going to research something, you have to be willing to look at all the evidence. You can't just dismiss everything that doesn't agree with you and then take the things that do agree with you. You have to have realistic expectations on who you're going to learn from. You can't say, I want the Bible to be proven true by someone who doesn't believe it's true. That's what he's saying. He's saying, I don't want to listen to a Christian because they're biased. Well, if a person believes the Bible is true, what are they going to be? Are they going to be an atheist? No, they're going to be a Christian because they believe it's true. So the only people who can give you the evidence that you want are the very people that you don't want to hear from. And that is how people research. This is a great example of that. Thank you for taking the time to watch.